Thank you very much. I don't normally work with notes, but when I got up so early this morning, I realized as I wrote this on the plane that I really didn't want to miss any of the points. You can't see what I can see, but as I look around here, I see people that are in my tribe. All of us leaders with great inspiration, making a change and heralding in really a new era in not only animal social justice, but a more just and compassionate society. You know, every positive move forward in human history has been because decent people stand up, unite, and say we can do better than this, and we will. What I'm seeing at the moment, and all over Australia today, is testimony to people standing on the right side of a human wrong. Live exports. Again, it's reached our newspapers. It's going to be reaching the media very soon again, as Animals Australia have financed through the compassion of people here and around Australia to show the public exactly what we are actually financing and voting for if we continue to vote for the main parties, as our previous speakers have said. Animals Australia have exposed over 15 exposés in different countries. It was 5 years ago that something happened in the collective unconscious, when on four corners we were shown in our own homes, and people that had never been aware of the things we're aware of, they were shown the horror in an Indonesian abattoir. Anyone who works in animal social justice knows that how horrifying those pictures are. They're a bit like Club Med relative to what is really happening in these environments. But we are limited of what we can obviously show the public. It goes beyond what we can even imagine, and that's why we're standing here. So after Indonesia, there was a shift, I think, in how people started to think about animals. And the government said, we'll put in system more things that we can do to protect animals. Now, protect is a very strange word, isn't it? In other words, we'll see where they go and we're able to tick the boxes and ensure that they go to industry-approved abattoirs that would in no way be approved by anyone of any decent thought at all. So it was shortly after Indonesia, really, that we then saw an expose on Pakistan, sheep buried alive because of fears around infection. The horror that we then saw on our television schemes. And then the SCAS system was put into place, a system that is meant to control from the point of leaving this country to the approved abattoirs. What a woefully inadequate system. I remember when I stood with Shafa Hamadi at Animals Australia in Martin Place in Sydney. And she said she risked her life and limb, as many of these investigators do, when she travelled to Kuwait for another expose. And she was standing in a marketplace, surrounded by the dead bodies of animals, brutalised, many of them not really dead, half dead, cut with dirty knives, outside of the SCAS system. So she put her life on the line in many ways and took the footage. She followed animals stuffed into the back of boots of cars and took photographs where the animals were literally being cooked alive in those cars to prove that the ear tags were those that were actually approved by the SCAS system that it was also meant to support. From that marketplace, she rang Animals Australia and they rang the Agricultural Department saying, this is what we have, here's the video footage, here is the evidence. That very day, new export licenses were released to new exporters. It's not only barbaric, we have a level of corruption in our government, almost veering on a totalitarian state, I believe. And when we stand on stages like this, increasingly we put our independence at risk in many ways, because the more people speak out, the stronger it seems that some of these government legislations are to silence us. There have been over 40 breaches of the SCAS code or practice, and there hasn't been one account taken against those exporters. In fact, the largest exporter has now turned around and said, well, why should I comply? I'm spending all this money on this, and if the others aren't doing it, why should I bother? It seems to be getting worse, but I want to assure you that the reason that is so is because we are shining light on the darkness. And whenever we do that, things come out of the dark into the light. Gandhi said many quotes, of course, which have greatly inspired us. But he said, first they ignore you, then they laugh at you and ridicule you, then they fight you, and then you win. I think we're at the fighting stage. Not only is our government resisting this rising tide of social awareness that says we can do better than this and we will, they are actively trying to expand the live export trade through absolute greed and profiteering, not only on the backcloth of animal suffering, but on environmental and people suffering. It's very important that we don't point to these countries and say this is where it happens. Because the reality is that everything we see on our television screens, all the images I see here, as our Green speaker said earlier, this goes on in this country. Sledgehammering goes on that we know. In fact, the dairy codes actually give the information of where baby bobby calves can be brutally killed by a blow to the head. That's part of our legislation. And the public don't know, of course. So it's not abroad, it's all over the world. But no amount of darkness has ever extinguished the light. As was mentioned a little bit earlier, is our government or our business leaders, they are not a government. We need to be clear about this. We're a list of bully boys and girls who are masquerading as governance for the people. But really it's a business. The ag-gag legislation, therefore, was put into place for health and safety reasons, for biosecurity. But the reality is that anyone who goes into an enclosure like an factory farm and exposes cruelty to animals can be subject to criminal investigation because they are interfering with the profits of that institution. How on earth did we ever reach this level? But it's not only animals. We're seeing it at all levels. We're seeing it with refugees. There are no legal action that can be taken against people who talk about refugees in detention centres. Where there is sexual and physical abuse, if they report it and interfere with the profits of those detention centres, they are subject to criminal investigation. I think they are fighting very strongly, and they will not win, because we are on the right side of a human wrong. You know, we're really living in quite unprecedented times where the level of greed and profiteering makes many of us despair and wonder that we're living in an economy and not a society. I remember when Margaret Thatcher in the UK said that. We don't live in an economy, we live in a society of people. But as a psychologist, I increasingly see this commoditization of animals, of our sentient other creatures, of people. People come to see me and in confidence talk about their lives falling apart. They talk about a system that doesn't work for them because they themselves have become commoditized. They believe that they invest more and more in making money, consuming products, acquiring things. It will lead to freedom and happiness, and we know it never will. Also see people, as we all do, excessive consuming and excreting, of course, in our beautiful planet. We're finding in the school system, I've come across people, children who are taken out into rural areas, who say to their parents, having been in the inner city education for so long, what are those things in the field, Mum? They don't know what sheep and cows are. And there was a report recently in Sydney where children had left the school and went out on a school visit into a rural area and they were falling over. Why? Because they could not balance on the uneven ground. They're used to walking in shopping malls and on concrete. I don't tell us this to depress us, but to say now is the time when we need to get people out of the trance. I'm not used to working with notes. And I also see it very much on a weekly level, that sort of separation from our environment, from sentient creatures, from having the conversation that matters. I have several rescue animals living with me, and I have a beautiful golden retriever. And it always saddens my heart when I'm out walking and her body is in this great big wave of excitement. And she goes towards a young child who doesn't even look up as they're looking at their mobile phone. This is a form of child abuse that is reaching levels that we really do need to do something about this commoditization at all levels. The system has distanced people from connecting with nature and all sentient beings. As people walk into the supermarkets, they see shrink wrap and they see food. They see luxury items, but what we see is the skin of an animal draped across a model's body. We need to break the trance. And it is a trance. It never baffles me, never ceases to baffle me how much the psychic defenses to the truth will come. And the more upset we become and the more emotional, people will switch off. We have the biggest job to do. But I want to tell us all something very important, is that we are the ones we've been waiting for. I think today is real testimony to real leadership. In fact, I share Lynn White's views, is that we're aiming to save the animals, but in fact they're saving us. But they need our help right now. Recently in Vietnam, we've seen the most atrocious behavior towards animals. And I really, like Rick, take my hat off to the investigators that stand there with a video camera, witnessing that firsthand. Those dear animals, it is so easy to criticize the workers and put our rage and anger towards the abattoir worker, equally caught in a system of economic global profiteering. Yes, people get attracted into jobs that actually want to brutalize people and the animals. But the reality is they're part of a system often trying to save and feed their families. That is not where our anger needs to go. We're 1 week away from an election, and as our previous speakers have pointed out, we've got a highly volatile electorate at the moment. We've seen changes in some of the policies of the parties because they're obviously realizing that animal social justice is an election issue. Many people, of course, believe that voting for economics will give them the freedom. But in fact, what they're doing with that action often is incarcerating themselves further in their own factory farm of life. People are clearly disillusioned. They're looking for change. When they see these images on the television, they realize it's not the society they want to live in. We've got a huge job to do, and we've got to transmute our grief and rage into positive action. I wholeheartedly agree with Rick. What we see is so anxiety-provoking is that we've got to find ways to intelligently share the information. And if I can give you any tip at all, let them do the work. So often we want to give all the information. Let me just show you this. Surely people will change if we do this. Ask questions. Ask people what concerns you, what is important to you. And it's usually around their own lives, their children, their health, the quality of life, and start to have a conversation around their health, around the environment, around living in a community and safety, and then extend it in to how we treat our animals, how we treat each other, and that there is a better way to be. This week is probably the most important week of our lives politically. I encourage everybody to speak out regularly, to talk to people on the train. I was talking to a guy at the train station a moment ago, and he asked me where I was going. He's a tradie and he's all decked in his work gear. And as soon as I mentioned what it was, he said, "That's not right what they're doing to animals." The vast majority of people do not agree with this. You know, several years ago, I interviewed Jonathan Safran Foer on a radio program. And you remember he wrote the book Eating Animals. And he said something that both surprised me, but also delighted me. He said there was a poll done in the United States some years back, and he writes about it in his book, which asked people all sorts of questions around the whole gamut of living. And he said, right across the United States, there was one thing, and one thing only, they agreed on: that there should be protection against cruelty to animals. Isn't that absolutely extraordinary? I honestly believe when we do polls here, we'd find similar results, and we are. Online votes tell us that, talking to people around us, we're reaching a tipping point, there is no doubt. Now, as the Animal Justice Party speaker earlier said, the candidate, we made history 2 years ago. We were the second country in the world to put a minister into office, a senator, Senator Mark Pearson, the second country in the world next to Holland to actually have someone speaking out directly for animals. Since that time, with only volunteers, there are now 53 candidates standing this time in the election. Isn't that extraordinary? And our name, the Animal Justice Party, is mentioned above the line in the main parties there in terms of the voting that we can take place in. And also, the preferences are now being given to party, or encouraged to give to parties that give to the AJP if they've got similar related sort of policies. So it's pretty extraordinary. The other parties therefore know that animal social justice is foremost in the voters' mind. I encourage you personally to vote number 1 for the Animal Justice Party. If that is not your first choice, you must vote 2. In a double dissolution, there is more opportunity, probably a unique opportunity this time round, to get certainly Linda Stoner in the Senate, a woman who's been involved in animal social justice for Animal Liberation New South Wales for 40 years. Animal Liberation hasn't been there for 40 years, of course, but he's getting along to that sort of timing. So the Animal Justice Party's job, though, is to end animal cruelty. But when I was speaking with the president, Steve Garlick, recently, a man who greatly inspires me, he gave up a successful career as a professor of spatial economics because he believed he had to put his life to this. And he said to me, you know, Claire, the first thing we're here to do is to end animal cruelty. However, we all hold the vision for a world beyond that, where we can truly celebrate the majesty of animals, to live in compassion with other people, our environment, and animals. And as was said just a moment ago, with some of those wonderful quotes that were said, a similar quote would be, I think by Leonardo actually, as long as we have abattoirs, we will always have battlefields. So we're at a very important time. Become politically active, speak to everyone. Open the conversation, ask them what's important to them, share with them a possibility to extend their circle of compassion so that together we can herald in a better world. Now, in ending, don't let Tommy die in vain. Together we are on the right side of a human wrong, and I promise you that no amount of darkness has ever extinguished the light. And also, if you have any doubt that an action taken repeatedly and in small ways can make a difference, let's have another quote by Gandhi, when he said, if you think something small can't make a difference, try going to bed with a mosquito tonight. Thank you very much indeed.
Another round of applause, please, for Clare. What an impassioned speech. Brilliant. Look, it's nice and warm up here.